Well, welcome everyone to Toula's Tips for Caregivers. It's been a while since I've recorded a show because my own caregiving world has been very, very busy. But I have been doing Toula's Tips for Caregivers for over 7 years now, broadcasting to caregivers in the United States and everywhere. Caregivers, particularly those who are taking care of an elder, a loved one over the age of 65, 70, face such unique challenges. If that caregiver is a working caregiver, someone who works 40 to 50 hours a week, sometimes it just feels like they're never off, that they never have any time to themselves or time to take care of themselves. So in this radio interview today, I've invited my good friend Chris MacLellan. He is a colleague, a radio show host as well, and author of a book called What's the Deal with Caregiving. And I've invited him to chat with me about my own caregiving experience in 2015. As most of you know, I've been the caregiver for my parents for about the last 5 years now, intensely for the last couple of years. Things do escalate over time as your parents decline. And so I've invited Chris to be with me and just talk a little bit about my experience in 2015. I did write an article about it called When This Caregiver is Sicker Than the Loved One, which was published on nextavenue.com. But Chris, let's go into it. And first of all, thank you for doing this show with me today.
Well, Toula, it is great to be back on the air with you, and we're kind of combining our two shows. But the conversation today is really we're gonna focus on you and what you're doing and how you're doing. Because I know that article that you wrote in Next Avenue was just terrific.
Well, thank you. It was one of those things where I really wanted to talk about the importance of caregivers taking care of themselves. I talk about it all the time. I wanted to quote some of the statistics that to me are startling about the numbers of caregivers who die before the person that they're taking care of due to many of the things we'll talk about on this show. But I also wanted to be really transparent because for years I have been telling people, you've got to put yourself at the top of the list. You have to make time for yourself. You've got to take care of yourself first so that you can take care of your loved one. All of that is absolutely true, and I do still believe that. However, I'm going to say I really do understand, I think even better now, that that's much easier said than done. When you're taking care of someone you love, first of all, that's the motivator. You love them so much that you want to give them the best of you. You give them all of your time. I heard someone say sometimes you kind of go into the caregiving role, full shoulders front, full force forward. And that's what I was doing, taking care of both of my parents. 2015 was a rough year for me. My parents are both living independently in their own home. Looking back now, they probably should have been placed in facilities prior to that time, but as a previous medical social worker and someone who's worked with seniors and caregivers all my life, my vision was always for them to age in place in their home. And so I gave it everything I had to make that happen. Unfortunately, my mother has some dementia. My father is very physically frail. And as he was trying to take care of her, I saw him physically deteriorate. And he would call me sometimes 2 or 3 times at work, just exasperated, asking for help. My father's a civil engineer by trade. I remember him one time saying, "Help! I'm at critical mass. I'm at critical mass. I don't know what to do." And I had to think, I'm at critical mass. That's not a term I've ever used before. But it made sense to him.
Yeah, that's a new term for caregiving.
I think we're going to use it. I'm at critical mass.
I'm at critical mass.
It made sense the way he said it, and I knew exactly what he meant. So I had a full year of responding to calls like that while working and while, trying to get all of the help and supportive care and home health agencies and anything and everything you can think of in the home to support them, to help them, because, again, that was my goal, to keep them at home. It just didn't work out that way. My mother, bless her sweet heart, with her dementia, would sometimes open the door to a new CNA standing there and start beating on them and saying, "You're not coming into my house."
Oh, my goodness.
And so this actually happened one time when I was doing a live radio show, and the home health agency person called me while I was doing this show. They knew I was on a commercial and said, "Could you please do something about your mother?" And I'm like, "No, I can't. I'm doing a radio show." But that is how my life was for 2015. It was constant. And sadly, my mother had a couple of hospitalizations for really high blood sugar because her diabetes was out of control. There were a couple of instances where she had way too much pain medicine in her, because when a dementia patient forgets they just had a pill 5 minutes ago and start demanding another one 5 minutes later, and then again 5 minutes later, and then another again 5 minutes later, the frail husband finally says, okay. So we had hospitalizations in 2015 for those things. And then my father fell. The stress of it got to him, and he had a bad fall. Thankfully, he didn't fracture anything, but all of that just sounded off trumpets of alarm to me, because I realized that this just wasn't going to work anymore, and that at some point I felt like I was trying to save both of their lives, and I was losing myself in that battle. Yeah. Can you relate to what I'm saying, Chris?
Oh, very much so. Because as I was thinking back and listening to your how beautifully you told the story, I was thinking of the word paradox came to my mind, and the reason that paradox came to my mind was, for caregivers, and you used the word so beautifully. It's all about love, care, and commitment, and we focus that love, care, and commitment on the people that we're taking care of. But then here's where the paradox comes in. We don't return it to ourselves, and the people who want us to take care of ourselves the most are those who are taking care of us, because we're their lifeline.
Right. They want us to take good care of ourselves so we can be there for them, but sometimes all that's required for them, along with working a 40 to 60-hour work week, you just come home depleted and have no energy to do anything for yourself. So here's my full confession. 2015, as a 59-year-old female, I didn't go to my own medical appointments like I should have. I didn't go get my yearly mammogram. I didn't go to the dentist twice a year like you're supposed to. When you're working full-time and you've taken off 2 or 3 times in a month to take parents to doctor's offices and other health care appointments and tests and x-rays, you get to work and you think, I can't take off any more time for myself.
Right.
How's that going to look? So you just don't. And that's what I did.
Finding that work-life balance for caregivers is very challenging, because you hit right on it. We take so much time off for the person that we're caring for, and who's the person that suffers? It's the caregiver.
And so it all kind of came to a head in 2015. We were at a point where we were doing some administrative and legal work and applying for some benefits. And those of you who've done that know how arduous that task can be, especially if you're applying for any state or federal benefits and you're working with an elder law attorney to make some of these things happen. Again, I was the point person, the person who had to collect all the needed documents, go back and forth to the credit union, make all the transfers, get all the documents, have you ever searched your parents' house for their wedding certificate when they were married 63 years ago?
Oh, goodness gracious.
All those kinds of things that you have to pull together for those sort of things. I was in a very stressful 3 to 5 month period in the fall of 2015. And one day, coming home from work, having dealt with all of this with my parents as well as a busy work day, I pulled into my garage and I had a boatload of documents in my hand that I needed to go into the house and sort of sort through and sift. So I got out of the car with all this stuff in my hand and slammed the car door on my right index finger and did it so badly that it split the nail bed down in half and split the finger. And anyway, a few months later, I had some surgery to repair the finger. But that moment of just such a stressful moment was truly my wake-up call that somehow I needed to slow down, step back, take a look at what I was putting myself through to my own adverse effects and just put a halt to it.
Yes. Oftentimes it does take a calamity like that for us to take a step back and really look at what we're doing to ourselves and how this is affecting ourselves. And it's easier said than done. And to be quite frank with you, Toula, that's the first time I've heard about the story with your finger, and my heart kind of pours out to you with that, because not only can I imagine how much that hurt, it probably just had to stop you in your tracks and say, what is going on here?
It's pretty much what it did, because I finally realized how stressed I was and how I was taking on too much. And I won't even say too much by myself, because I had help. I had an elder law attorney, helping us with all of it. But there should have been maybe somebody else assisting me with the gathering of everything that I needed in the whole process. The process of applying for any kind of benefits, as we all know, can take months, and it seems like it will never end. And I needed to make this happen. I felt the pressure to make this happen for my father so that he wouldn't be paying out the exorbitant amount of money he would have been otherwise for my mother's care. So I took that upon myself, and it happened, but I definitely had some repercussions from it. So, again, it was a wake-up call for me, or a moment of truth. It was in the very end of 2015, and I said enough. 2016 is the year I start taking care of myself, even if it means others have to wait, even if it means I have to say, no, Dad, I can't do that today. I can do that for you 2 to 3 days from now, but I can't do it today. Sometimes you have to tell your loved one no.
Yeah, you anticipated one of the questions I wanted to ask you. It's hard to say no, but it's okay to say no.
Right.
Things don't have to happen that minute, but we're in the middle of caregiving. We think, oh my goodness, they need this. I need to drop everything and go. And
right.
Learning how to say no is is a very difficult task.
It is for those of us, especially those of us who are wired to be carers and nurturers. When you're wired that way and you love somebody so intensely, you want to do everything you can for them, but then you find yourself in not such a great state. So I had to learn how to say no. It took practice. And I still do say no to my dad every now and then for things, or at least postpone them. I don't feel everything he asks for now has a sense of urgency to it, like I used to. Mm-hmm. I used to drop everything, no matter what it was. But I don't do that anymore. And I think that's, maybe changed the nature of our relationship a little bit, but it's not impacted it negatively. I think he's just had to realize, okay, this is affecting my daughter. I love my daughter. I don't want her to be in this situation.
Well, and I have to do full disclosure here. I've had the privilege of being in the presence of both you and your father, and there's no doubt in my mind the love and care that both of you have for one another. And it was, it was beautiful for me to see that in person. And I really appreciate you taking me to visit with him.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Now both parents are in facilities. At the end of 2015, I ended up having to place my mother in a dementia unit of a long-term care facility. And then we moved my dad in with me. I'd only been married 3 years at the time, and I had this wonderful husband who said, sure, bring Dad on in. Thank goodness. Not everybody would be that way. So Dad lived with me for a year, and it was a good experience, and I'm thankful to have had that experience. But he would fall sometimes when I was at work, and of course he would call me, and I would dial 911 and rush right home. And then last year, about September of 2016, both my sister and I had to be out of town at the same time. So we put him in a nice assisted living for respite so we could both take our trips. And lo and behold, he loved it and said he wanted to stay there.
Wow. He made the decision himself.
He made the decision himself. I didn't have to feel guilty about placing him, because I probably wouldn't have for a while. But he knew that he needed more care, so he took that upon himself and did it. And I think that was an act of love for me, that he did that. Oh, it took a lot of responsibility off my shoulders.
It certainly did, and for him to have the foresight to be able to do that, and in one sense, I probably he was able to meet some new folks at the facility, and also recognizing that maybe he's taking a little bit of the burden off of you.
Yeah, I think he has, and it has been good for him. You're right. The socialization factor is so important. He's got buddies now that he talks to at dinner and looks forward to seeing, and I still get to see him every day because he's so close by. And so I have the best of all worlds. I don't have to physically give him the care anymore. And when I go to see him, I can bring him his favorite thing, which is dark chocolates, and just spend time with him and be his daughter. And
that's really the role that you want to be in.
Yeah, I got tired of being the functional person who takes care of him and my mom. I want to just be the daughter and enjoy that relationship for as long as they are still here on this earth. So it's my focus now.
There was another thing that just came to my mind as we were talking about your dad being in the facility and not being isolated and socialization. And we haven't touched on this yet in our conversation, but that happens for caregivers too. There's isolation, there's lack of socialization when you're working 40, 60 hours a week and you're caregiving. I remember people asking me what my hobbies were, and I couldn't remember what my hobbies were. And I'm wondering I wonder how you feel about that.
I know that a lot of caregivers do tend to isolate while they're taking care of a loved one, and they stop their hobbies, they stop doing the things they love doing. In my instance, I can say, well, I'd neglected a lot of my medical care. I didn't stop doing the things I love doing. I did find time to still go Latin and ballroom dancing. That's my favorite thing. I love to be with other people, and dancing is a great way to socialize and get good exercise and laugh and listen to music and have fun. So I was able to keep that up at least some, and I still do. And then my husband and I like to travel every now and then, even if it's just a short trip. So we managed to keep doing that, and finding the right care for both of my parents. But you're right. Isolation, I can say that word, isolation only leads to depression.
Right.
And we all know that caregivers are at a huge risk for depression anyway. So the worst thing you can do is isolate. And so I put my plea out to you as caregivers, please don't do that. Find time to be with other people in your world, your other friends and family who've had relationships for the years. They want you, first of all. And then second of all, you need their love and support while you're caring for a loved one. What do you think about that, Chris?
It's so important because we've all, and I think you touched about it a little bit in your article, and we've heard statistics in the past about caregivers who get sick, and there's a lot of different studies out there right now about caregivers who actually pass on before the person that they're taking care of, and that's why it's so important to have these open and honest discussions amongst ourselves and amongst caregivers, because that's how we learn. When a caregiver can share their story as you're doing today, it helps another caregiver, because we can all recognize the space that each one of us is in.
Yeah, it's a space that's pretty unique in a lot of ways, and people who have never been a caregiver really understand it. They don't understand the challenges that come with it, particularly if you're working full-time and you're the primary caregiver and responsible for everything for a loved one. That's just juggling way too many balls all at one time, and at some point something's got to give. Some point you're going to drop something, and you need to have the people in your life who you've known for years and who love you still be involved in your life. The other thing about that is if you're neglecting them and while you're taking care of a loved one for 2-3 years or however long, when your loved one's gone, and really the idea is for the sick older loved one to die first, when they're gone, you're going to have to establish those relationships.
That's right. And
that's not easy.
It's not easy to rekindle those relationships, because a lot of folks they've moved on, and especially if they're not in a caregiving situation, they really don't understand. And from my personal experience, it's almost like starting a whole new life, because when you isolate and you let go of all these friends, and then all of a sudden it's over. And then you're left standing. What do we do next? That's why it's life after caregiving can be just as challenging as a life during caregiving, and it's all in the common denominator is isolation.
Right, agreed. Which is why I tell people to consider their life after caregiving while they are taking care of their loved one, because again, the goal is for you to come out alive and well at the end of this, and to still enjoy life, not to be just barely surviving or not knowing who you are anymore. And you just have to pace yourself.
Yeah, very much so.
And keep the relationships.
So, another area that I'd like to touch on with you is I think we've had this conversation before, that really the caregivers are the backbone of the healthcare system. If caregivers were to go on strike for one day, what would happen to the healthcare system? It would crumble. But what do you think?
I think it would. It would.
It would. It just if all caregivers, they either went to they took the person that they're caring for and left them at a daycare center or a hospital emergency room or urgent care, what would happen? It would crumble. So, not that I'm suggesting that they do that, but
although I've known a few people, one lady in particular who did, she just dropped off her mother at an ER room and went south.
Oh my
God. I wouldn't recommend that.
But and this is a conversation I'd love to do a number of shows with you on. But what changes need to happen in our healthcare system to actually recognize what caregivers are doing?
Well, I think first of all, policymakers have to realize what caregivers are doing and the economic value attached to it. The RAND study that came out a couple of years ago attached a dollar figure annually for caregivers, that if they were paid like a whopping minimum wage, the amount of care that would be provided annually equaled $570 billion with a B.
Right.
Dollars a year. Now, that's a savings to our healthcare system. That's a savings to our long-term care system with Medicare and Medicaid. That's on the backs of family caregivers. And at some point, our policymakers have got to realize that they've got to put in place some tax credits, some kind of programs to support caregivers. And the other thing that really comes to mind is I would like to see the medical system, actually I'm going to say this, work, the whole medical system, see patients the way that a hospice organization does. Hospice care is the only kind of care in the whole healthcare system that sees the patient and the family caregivers as one unit. It's the only kind. When you go take your loved one to the doctor asks the loved one how they're doing, what's their blood sugar levels, checks their vitals, do everything they can do to take care of the patient. They don't ask how the caregiver's doing. And so I think in our nation we have got to move from patient-centered care, which we worked a long time to get to. Right. I was working in healthcare during those years. But we've got to move from that to patient and family-centered care, because you've got to look beyond just the patient, because the caregivers are aligned with them. They're united with them, and they are truly, in so many instances, one with them. And if doctors don't listen to the family caregiver, they're missing a lot of important information, first of all.
Very much so. Because the caregiver is with their patient more than they are, and if the doctor's not paying attention to the caregiver, then you might just need a different doctor. Right,
because, like you said, they're with them more, and they know really what's going on, and they could give the true story of what's going on with their loved one or the patient. Sometimes when that patient doesn't want to divulge it to the doctors. I had appointments with my mom and with my dad individually, sitting in the room where my dad would say, "Oh, I'm okay. I don't need anything. I don't even know what to have brought me here. Everything's fine." And I would just roll my eyes. And the doctor would look at me and she'd go, okay, excuse me. And then she would take me out into the hallway and say, "Now what's really going on?" I was fortunate to have a doctor like that, but not everybody does. And so I think it has to be seen as a collaborative process, patient and family-centered. There should be open sharing of information and decision-making. Don't leave the caregiver out. They're a part of the process.
They're a valuable part of the process. And I think that, without the caregiver's knowledge, the care recipient, the caree, is not getting the right medical attention, or the best medical attention that they could have.
That's absolutely true. And another thing physicians should note, actually, as well as asking the caregiver how they're doing for themselves and what's really going on, is that there's studies now, multiple studies, that show that if you support the caregiver, if you give them what they need in terms of supportive services in the home, or even sometimes just doing the assessment to see how they're doing, the outcome of the patient will be better. That just kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
It certainly does. It certainly does. Goodness, we could have a number of conversations on topics we've touched on today.
We could, and I don't want to, make this an hour-long show. I think we should probably wrap it up in a little bit. But there's a lot of important things here, and I told my story and was transparent about my year 2015 when I didn't do the best for myself. Thankfully, I turned it around 2016, and I've kept it that way this year. But it wasn't easy. So caregivers, I hear you when you say, "Toula, don't tell me I got to take better care of myself and put myself first." I know it's not easy, but the message is still the same. If you don't, you will not be able to take care of your loved one, because what you're not doing or doing is impacting your overall health and well-being, therefore impacting the health and well-being of the person you're taking care of. So it's a domino effect.
It's a domino effect, and And that's why the theme of your show is so perfect. Toula's tips for caregivers, and you're following your own tips. That's a good thing.
I'm sure trying better now than I did in 2015.
Well, I think this idea of combining healing ties and Toula's tips is, I think it's got legs.
I do too, and I'm really happy to be able to do that with you, Chris. We're going to do some good things together on our future radio shows, and I know we've talked about the title for another show called Answers for Caregivers that we're going to do together. So I hope all of our listeners will stay tuned and stay with us. You've got a wealth of caregiving experience from your experience of caring for Richard, and you've done so much research and studying on it. You have a lot to offer people. And my caregiving experience is with my parents, not with a partner or a spouse. So we have different perspectives to bring, different stories, obviously. But I think our different backgrounds mesh well together, and that together we can be of support and help to those who are caring for a loved one. And I know that's our goal.
And that's our common goal.
That's our common goal, to be there for the caregiver, to provide support, encouragement, a little inspiration, to help you keep on keeping on.
Keep on caregiving with and be a healthy caregiver. I've enjoyed this quite a bit today, Toula. Thank you.
I have too, Chris. Thank you for joining me on the show, and I look forward to doing a lot more with you.
I think right after Labor Day, we'll have some nice announcements for both of our listeners, and as we move forward with our two shows and on our new show, Answers for Caregivers, we'll get all that information out to our followers, and we'll just continue. Yeah. We'll just continue being advocates, because as our good friend Joni Aldrich says, advocacy does heal us.
Yes, it does. And it's a good thing for all of us to do, to reach out and help other people. In so doing, we truly are healed. So I'd like to just close out by saying what I've always closed my shows with, which is blessings to all of you out there who are taking care of a loved one. May you be blessed, and may you find strength to keep on.
And may I add, I'm blessed to have you and Fred as a friend. Thank you for. Thank you for. Just thank you for being the two of you, and I look forward to future Belgian waffles.
It's on the agenda. We have to set a date. You have to come back up and visit us.